why are we here? Why did you decide to join this live broadcast today? Because more people than ever are questioning the value of higher education. On our podcast, DataU, we explore why they're right, why they're wrong, and which institutions are rising to the challenge. Today, we want to talk about normalizing data for student-centric success. And we have two Steppingblocks VIPs here with us to help us do that. So Carlo Martinez is the founder and CEO of Steppingblocks, and Dr. Jacob Bonney is our analytics consultant. And if you're just now joining us, I am Erin, the marketing manager for Student Success. So at this point, Dr. Bonney, I will turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Erin. So the first conversation we'd like to have today is really focusing on non-traditional competition. And so what is happening across the market. From there, as Erin said, we're going to take a little bit of a pivot and talk about skills and skills gaps. And then finally, the third portion of our conversation today is going to be focused on career services. And so I'm excited for all three of these conversations. I think thinking about the work that we do and the collaboration that we have with our partners, both our partners who've participated in other DataU episodes, not DataU live episodes, but other DataU episodes, or some of the universities we collaborate with. Really, these are key issues that are facing institutions all across the country. And so we just wanted to take some time to explore each of those. So thinking a little bit about microcredentialing, certifications, and non-degree programs. Really, there are a variety of factors within the market that have impacted how individuals are choosing their future career and how they're leveling up their skills, so to speak. And so really, one of the pieces here is that individuals are changing careers faster than ever. If you've noticed any of the news recently, since August, we've called it the Great Resignation, or there's lots and lots of career changes. And that's something that has really been of big emphasis, to the discourse across the country, certainly in light of what's happened with COVID-19. But I don't know that anybody would attribute everything that's happened as far as shifting marketplace, as far as education, to just what's happened with COVID. I think, for me, working in higher ed for the past a decade or so, the writing's been on the wall. These are things that have been changing slowly but surely over time. Corporations, companies getting involved in credentialing and helping their employees gain additional skills. And so really, we're seeing a lot of trends, certainly exacerbated by what's happened more recently, but there's a wide shift in what's happening there. Additionally, the power of the internet and the power of technology has caused shifts in how individuals are pursuing education. Certainly not just geographic factors, but also time and time frameworks kind of are a big piece of that, right? Individuals may question whether or not a traditional four-year degree has the same effect as, a couple of micro-credentials earned from a particular, educational entity or company who's providing those workforce pieces. And really the last piece here to focus on is how the economy, certainly the economy of education, has shifted to focus on outcomes. We said at the beginning, more folks are questioning the value of higher education. I come very proudly from a liberal arts background, from a small private institution, and I know that I would not be the person I am today without that foundation in the liberal arts. But that's not necessarily a conversation that everyone is ascribing to nowadays, and it's really an interesting piece for us to kind of think about how the outcomes associated with degrees or career pathways are affecting the decisions that students and families make as they talk about academics and their future. A key piece to this conversation as well relates to all students at all levels. While we might think of the university setting as primarily for first-time in college undergraduate students, more folks than ever before are considering second degrees, whether that's master's degrees or many of the credentials we're talking about here. Or certainly individuals who have not gotten a degree who might go back to finish and what that looks like as well. So lots and lots of factors here affecting how individuals might pursue education.
So one thing I want to add here, Dr. Bonney, is how much we've learned about measuring outcomes, how we thought about it before and how we think about it now. Working with our partners, we learned that it's not a simple answer, and everybody, it means different things for different people. The student success means different things for different people. And while we focus on data-driven outcomes, there's a lot more that we've learned happens as you move a student from when they enter school all the way out to when they graduate, and what happens afterwards. So really, what I want to talk about is that first learning, that the first thing that I learned that really we didn't think about when I started Steppingblocks really was the accountability. So many universities we have recently learned as they implemented student success that the programs that however they develop it, when we hold the students accountable in terms of their education, the program, the classes that they need to take, but there hasn't been that many programs in career development, right? In incorporating something that shows them how to be career flexible, how to build skills that get them employed. So a lot of times, the common theme is they graduate and they don't know what to do, right? And I think what has been really interesting is that as many resources as a Career Center or the university provides, if you don't help the students become accountable, they're still going to be lost along the way, right? I think Dr. Bonnie, you had a DataU with Wake Forest, right? And talked about how they build this student success program by building specific coursework along the way, all the way down, and tracking that, right? And we, using that model where we can work with our partners and saying, hey, we can provide this resource like everybody else, but unless you incorporate that into your program, there's no way to track that effectiveness, right? And I think that is just something that's so important that we really didn't capture until some years after learning from this group. But then also, that's the first stage, right? Once you capture that the interest of the students and that they understand that they are responsible for their own careers, how do you track and measure? How do you make sure that the students are on the right career path or that they're making the right decisions? And that's where the data comes in. Do universities understand what the students want to do? Do students have resources and data that supports their decision-making process and have that on an ongoing basis as they go through over the course of the years, right? It's not something that you do one time, but it's something that has to continuously develop as they track and adjust this their different milestones. And then when they graduate, right? It's how you measure what happens after they graduate. I know that a lot of universities measure outcomes based on the first destination survey or maybe some data points that show salary and employment. But the reality is that if the students are accountable and if they have been taught how to develop new skills and how to understand the demand of the workforce and the supply that they're providing, and they can identify the gaps, they can become lifelong learners, right? And that should be really important for the universities, because that's how you start actually measuring outcomes. It's not something that is just what happens right after graduation, but it's what happens many years after graduation. How do you measure that career mobility, their economic mobility, their career mobility, and that's that data on that career mobility goes back to the university so they can keep going and showing those outcomes and improving them and fine-tuning them. So recently, actually, through some exercises with some of the employers, and I learned about the Peter principle. Lawrence J. Peter in 1969 developed this principle built around the corporate environment, and it basically says that people get promoted up to the point of their own incompetence, right? So I graduate, I have my skill set, I start progressing, but if I don't keep learning, I either that's the end of my career, or I start failing and I become incompetent, right? And this is where it's important to build lifelong learners and understand how they are responsible for their careers, how to get those new skills, how to get those new certifications, how to have that corporate training so that they continue to grow and make decisions around their career. So I know, sharing this with you, Jacob, you also share some interesting insights about this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what you're saying really resonates with me and my experience in higher ed, right? We we talk often about sort of the buy-in and getting students on board with, their own success and ensuring that they're focused on those next steps. I think sort of as we posed the question at the beginning of this session, what is sort of the conflict between higher ed and things like micro-credentialing? I see great opportunity for us in higher ed to think about how those two might be compatible. I had a great conversation. Well, actually, I think, Carlo, you had the conversation in a DataU session with Dr. Monique Snowden at CU Denver, who talked about being a university for life, being a campus for life. And I think that that's a really cool concept for us to think about. How do we encourage students to perhaps come home to their alma mater for some of those credentials or additional certifications if those are offered, or empower them to think about their next steps. I see those little advancement jumps. We always love to hear how our alumni are doing great, cool, wonderful things. And so how can you as an institution sort of instill those principles in students early on to be invested in their careers and then meet those needs, when and where they are. I think another great use about this outcomes data is to identify, what are the gaps in the community that you serve, whether that be your role as, a regional institution or a national institution, to really identify, what certifications or what micro-credentials could you issue as a campus and leverage some of the data to really explore, what are the needs within your own constituency to be able to support and address those components. I think the conversation about outcomes is also really interesting and accountability, because there's increased pressure from all sorts of angles. Certainly parents and students want to hear the outcome of those degrees, but increasingly more and more federal and state institutions, governments are asking for those outcomes and getting expectations, on what folks should be accomplishing. So lots of interesting pieces there. And I think there's some really cool work happening across the country. In particular, I'll shout out our DataU episode with the folks at FIU. Peyton shared some great strategies that they're using to ensure they're helping students succeed and meet the outcomes, not only from the impetus that we want to support our students, but also in response to some of the metrics that are required by state institutions in Florida. So lots and lots of different angles there for us to explore how you might complement these sort of increased demand for micro-credentials and certifications across your constituency.
You reminded me of when we talk about that, making or helping it, the university is helping students become accountable. And initially when we started was, hey, here's a resource, right? And then just publish this resource and see what happens. And we saw, a few institutions, UMGC, for example, had a great idea, which was incorporating that into their, incorporate a fun assessment into their initial onboarding program, right? Into that phase where the students, they might not be interested in career exploration, but that got them involved. And it was an assignment to write a research paper about, hey, what are you going to do with this major, right? And I think it's been incredible, actually, the level of engagement that goes from a small initiative like that, and to see that grow, right? To see how it progresses over time from people that would have never done it otherwise, right? And I think that helps create that culture within the institution to partner with other people and learn how to make those accountable. I think the other one, I think our partners, I love our partners at Georgia State, where they created their career pages for every single major has data on outcomes, but at the same time, they're providing across the university resources within the curriculum to help all those students figure out and research the different types of career paths that they could take. And that goes over time. And you actually see those that engage the most, that's where you start seeing that progression. So, measuring outcomes is probably one of the most challenging things that any university could have, because, there isn't a standard practice, right? The outcomes for Harvard, for Georgia State, for a small community college, they have different goals, right? But I think it's really understanding what those metrics are and being able to capture that information so you can bring it back. It becomes really critical. So,
absolutely.
So now moving into kind of as a bridge going into what we talked about was the Peter principle is okay, there is that progression, and how do we start understanding the skills gap? And that has been I guess, a combination of understanding the workforce, the higher education, and the outcomes data of what happens after graduation. So, Dr. Bonnie, go ahead and give some context here, and then I'll move on into some of the examples that we've seen with the universities.
Yeah, absolutely. So, really this emphasis on skills, right? And as Carlos shared, we know that individuals need skills to level up and progress throughout their history. Really, several components here are very interesting. Alumni really want these skills. I think there's always an ebb and flow in a conversation in higher ed, and I'll go back to my earlier comment about coming from a liberal arts background. Which of these skills are tangible versus the skills that are more intangible? And I think that's a really interesting sort of part of the conversation. You'll see a couple of quotes here on the screen. Only 35% of U.S. students feel confident a college education gave them the training and skills necessary for a successful career. I think the interesting question about that is, what are these skills that are referenced, in this particular poll? Do students understand things like teamwork, collaboration, and the ability to think critically? Are those the skills that are being referenced? Or are we talking about more tangible, sort of on-the-job skills? And we know from additional research that both are needed, right? The NACE survey that goes to employers every year always highlights many of those sort of less tangible skills as key components. And I know we've talked in other DataUs about the tangibility versus intangibility of skills and how both are very important. Right now, 83% of employees are really focused on, exploring those skills. And it's really a key component. How are we thinking about how individuals are gaining skills, both for their current careers, but also future careers? For anybody who spends any time on, career-driven social media, LinkedIn, et cetera, I constantly see conversations about pivoting and skills change. And in fact, we had a great conversation, a great DataU recently with a colleague about how we can really think about career changes in higher ed and how folks might pivot and explore a new career and gain the skills quickly to be able to shift into a different position. So lots of great conversations around thinking through skills. What are the demands of skills? What are employers looking for? And how can universities play a key role in helping students not only develop these skills, but identify the skills that are best needed, throughout things like the interview process. I know our third topic focuses a little bit more on career and career services, but a key conversation I have with many of our partners often is, are these skills gaps based on actual skills that students are missing, or are we having an articulation issue where students are gaining these skills, they just don't know how to articulate them, whether it be in the interview process, on a resume, even on the job. So lots of key sort of components here as we think about the disparities associated with skills. And also, I think a great conversation here is about equity. What are the components when we talk about access and completion? How might that be affecting folks? We had another great conversation with Dr. Belinda Hippolyte from Oklahoma State, who really focused on that as well.
So, this is what I want to see. So, because I think the first time I would put it in context to start understanding gaps, right? Is what is it, right? I think again, it's one of those things that people have different definitions for what a skill gap is. And one way to look at it is really what are the so one of the ways to look at it is what are the employers maybe what is one specific employer looking for a specific discipline, and what does a student or what does a group of a student what do they have? What are they really? What are the things that they can immediately contribute, right? And if you think about someone that is applying for a job, right, and there's always a skills requirement, the gap is what they don't have, right? And then somebody more qualified will actually fill in that gap. And then the gap is going to be between what employers want and what students are able to articulate they have. I think something interesting you just said, Dr. Bonnie, was sometimes the students have the skill. I think one thing that has been coming up every single time we talk about skills is communication, right? Which is becoming extremely important. But a lot of people don't even put it on their LinkedIn profiles or their resumes because it just seems so unimportant. It seems like, well, everybody's able to communicate, everybody's able to manage or run projects or do things that are taken for granted. At the same time as you have those technical type of skills. So it's identifying these skills that collectively the university maybe has gaps in. Hey, your graduates are not reporting these skills. Is it why? Is it because they're reporting them, or is it because we may have a gap in our curriculum that could be filled by either adjustments or partnering with other institutions that are further ahead in creating coursework or boot camps or courses that can help aid those skills. At the same time, as a student, identifying those self skills that, as you know, going back to what we talked about, being accountable for your own growth, having the knowledge and the resources to tap into the research, understanding the workforce to figure out what are those skill gaps and training that needs to be had. And I think the more that the universities understand this, when you look at advancement programs and helping students, helping their alumni grow, having those resources will only help the outcomes measure, however outcomes measurement of success relies, all focus on skills and micro-credentials and anything of that sort.
Dr. Carlo, sorry about that, Dr. Bonnie. Can you talk a little bit more about tangible and intangible skills and how that might be reflected in the data and how universities and institutions might use those together or separate those, and how students might be able to articulate that in a resume and an interview?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think, and my thought here is what is gained in the classroom versus what's gained on the job versus what's gained in co-curricular components, right? We know that students learn so much from things like internships, study abroad programs, many of those high impact practices that are available. And I think that's a big piece, kind of going back to the accountability and encouraging students to be accountable for their own careers. Well, I remember many conversations with students, during my time on campus where I would say, if you've gotten to graduation and all you've done is gone to class, you're potentially going to have some challenges in a career field, depending on where you're going, because many of those intangibles, are things that you pick up beyond the classroom, through clubs, through intramural sports. I mean, there's many opportunities. Fraternity and sorority life. There's great advantages to many of those activities, and we don't always think about how that plays a factor. Certainly, as we talk about how higher ed is changing and the landscape of higher ed is changing, I think a key component is how do we get those co-curricular learning opportunities into the hands of students who are entirely online? What does that look like, and how do we help scale that? Because really, that's going to be where the students are going to gain a lot of those intangible skills. And at the end of the day, it's helping them understand the material that they've learned in the classroom is very important and certainly key to their career. But also, things like cultural competence, as I referenced our conversation with Dr. Hippolyte. There's a variety of ways that students need those sort of critical pieces in order to be successful in their careers. And so thinking about how, one, they can gain those skills through a variety of support programs at the institution, and two, then articulate those skills to potential employers, both on, as we said, on resumes and elsewhere, are really key components. And I know our friends in career services constantly do this work and advocate for it, but a great opportunity to sort of think about building a coalition across campus to help folks understand the value of those co-curriculars and move forward in that way.
I think at this point, I'd like to share some of an anecdote that we experienced here at Steppingblocks as we grew, and many tech companies experience. I guess any company that has lived through this COVID pandemic. As soon as we had to go remote, I remember 2019, we had a meeting, and one day we're all here in the office, and then boom, all of a sudden we all have to go into our homes, and a lot of people moved out, and we have a lot of employees that live in different areas. But what was critical there was that the organization skills and the communication skills became so important, right? And as brilliant as everyone was, I think nobody was really prepared to have this kind of conversation, to articulate those ideas that you can just whiteboard and throw in. Aaron, you and I spent many, many times in a whiteboard and throwing things around, throwing ideas and coming up with, maybe we'd call Dr. Christie, just say, hey, let's come up with something that we can get an initiative going. And then all of a sudden, the ideas that you have to articulate, they need to be well thought out, well communicated. If you're not on camera, what is the tone that you have when you're just chatting, and somebody might get the message differently. So the dynamics of that communication online is becoming such a critical skill that we all have to learn, and we all have to take additional coursework and learn how to work this way, right? And it has been changing, but it's just a small component of how important it is to continue to grow and identifying that gap in what does it take, and us as an employer, we're experiencing the challenge. Is that part of how is that communicated down to universities and universities and educators, that this is a gap that we can immediately start training our students for, so when they come out of college, they can say, hey, I have all the skills. I can work with Zoom, I can work with Slack, I have all these different skill sets, and we can just plug them immediately, even if they're lacking in other skills. So I thought that was that's just one small example, right? Of even us internally experiencing that change in the skills gap, and even more especially with people in the technology teams, where they are used to doing everything, all the communications in an office, and all of a sudden they have to actually have meetings and have presentations just to create a concept that they would typically just share in talking to the person next to them.
I think that's really a great segue into our third conversation here, which is focused on career services and even more broadly, how we are supporting these components across campus. So our thesis here is really that career development is everyone's responsibility. We're going to talk through some of these impacts and then really talk about, what are some of the next steps to this. But I think, this idea of career development being everyone's responsibility is something that our friends in career services have been probably shouting from the rooftops for decades, but perhaps other folks across the institution have not bought into until more recent times. I think back to some of my early days in housing and residence life, and how programs and initiatives transitioned from focusing entirely on supporting the students to more conversations around things like sense of belonging, but ultimately around even career development and professional development. Towards the end of my tenure in housing, we were building out curriculum in the residence halls that talked about how students could apply some of their skills that they were gaining by living in a dorm room with 3 other people to their future careers. And so really that's a cool thing. And I think really exciting work that's happening. However, by the same token, we're not necessarily seeing at every institution, that sort of emphasis. The first impact here is that perhaps career services isn't always receiving the priority, whether that be through funding or support, or really their work is perhaps siloed or isolated. We know that siloing is an ongoing issue that a variety of universities experience in higher ed. Impact 2 here is that 1 in 4 college students report having never visited their university career center or used any of their online resources. So again, that kind of goes back to that accountability piece. How do we get those in the hands of students? And really impact 3 here focuses on how some universities aren't making career readiness mission critical as part of the entire student experience. And so I want to kind of just walk back through each of those over the next couple minutes and talk about some of the frameworks that we know partners are using to support their students. I think when we talk about when career services teams directly aren't receiving priority or funding or working in isolation, I hear great stories from colleagues across the country about how they're incorporating this work into other places. I just mentioned, sort of the collaboration with housing. I think that's a really interesting component. Certainly, we've talked about how this career development component can be incorporated directly into the classroom. Our friends at Georgia State are doing that. Our friends at University of Maryland Global Campus are doing a great job at that. And so thinking about how to sort of make everyone involved in that conversation and get buy-in. We know increasingly there are deans and academic units who are passionate about this, and whether that be creating specific courses around career development or just incorporating that into broad conversations. Certainly, I think there's some great work happening in that area, and always some great opportunities to sort of develop and build coalitions to support that mission. How do we get students to use resources? I think that's a conversation I've been a part of for a number of years. And really, we talk about the world that we live in now, a 24/7 world. How do you provide online support to students? How do you help encourage them to leverage the tools and the resources that are out there? Carlo and I were talking about this before we talked today, and I think of student engagement as a spectrum. On the one end, you can provide passive resources and hope that by building it, they will come, right? That's a sort of a field of dreams model. On the other end of the spectrum, you can build very intentional approaches to sort of the co-curricular experience, whether that be directly through classroom resources or academic advising, different milestones that you might establish, and then everything in between, right? That is a whole spectrum, and so you might be able to build out, a great sort of campus curriculum that doesn't involve academics if you don't have faculty buy-in, with the dream of getting to faculty buy-in. So thinking about where you might be on that spectrum with your resources, especially resources around career development, is probably a really important part of the conversation. And then think about the resources that you need to get there, whether that's additional financial resources, additional staff, or even just additional collaboration and buy-in from units across campus. And really the last piece here, knowing that universities aren't always making career readiness mission critical, I think there's some great opportunities to help articulate why it's mission critical. And I think, a great example there might be to collaborate with some of your alumni or advancement units to get some direct feedback from your corporate partners. If you have somebody working on, the corporate relations side, or interfacing directly with employers, perhaps getting their feedback and gathering some information, and then compiling that into some great conversations might be really beneficial. I often engage with some of our partners around how they're identifying employers that might be trending down and contacting those folks directly to see what additional support or resources might be necessary to get that employer back, whether that be through career fairs or other collaborative opportunities. So thinking about getting that buy-in from your employers is a really interesting component as well. I'll pause there. Carlo, any thoughts on any of those impacts?
Well, my only thought actually is something that it's a little bit outside of, I guess, higher ed itself, and something we experienced with there in a few, I guess it was, I don't know, I want to say maybe 2 years ago, that that partnership with students, partnering with students can be super effective, right? We saw how we have a DataU with Justin Wen from the Classified College, and the reason that that we know about him is because he was promoting career exploration and data literacy in TikTok, right? So he got all these kids excited to go and explore. So there are all these avenues that need to be discovered. And I think in career development, in some responsibilities, also that partnership with the students, hearing that voice of the student. And I think learning how to engage with that, there's a bit of a gap because of the culture that has been career services, right? The traditional email doesn't work in engaging through those channels, or maybe through the curriculum. But I think that part of it, I think there's a lot of opportunity where you can engage with other resources that are also interested in career development, that have the voice of the student in mind. I know, Aaron, you have had a lot of conversations, and that's something that you're really passionate about. And that it has been something that we really we're not expecting would be effective, right?
Yeah, we talk a lot about the student voice. I think now is probably a good time to share a few quick wins that anyone who works in career services or adjacent to career services right now could maybe implement. One is by just bringing students to work as interns or, work for any paid opportunities inside your career center. So having that voice, that shared voice that can speak directly to the students in a way that you never will be able to. I think that's super important. Also thinking about tapping into any student ambassador programs that are already in place, not building something new, but using those resources, the programs that you already have, tie them to career services, which they may not be now, and using that as an avenue to speak directly to your students. Another channel we talked about, Justin, when you mentioned declassified college and TikTok, students are already using these channels that probably people who run career services don't even know about yet. So you have these students on your campus already. So finding out who those influential students are and getting them to help brand the Career Center to maybe be a little bit more fun. Those are 3 quick wins that I think any Career Center, as long as you're tapping into your students, can easily implement.
What I love about that is, and we almost got through an entire webinar without me, the higher ed nerd, referencing student development theory, but all of those pieces align perfectly with Aston's theory of involvement. We know that students learn more or as much from each other as they do from faculty in the classroom. And so, academic support for students, TAs, those sorts of things have been around for decades. And similarly, ambassador programs or student positions, peer mentor positions continue to grow at institutions across the country. And so, yeah, absolutely. Thinking about how everyone's responsibility can also encompass your student leaders is really interesting to me. Thinking about partnering with student organizations, student government, fraternities and sororities. Those are also groups who are very passionate about student success and about the student experience, and certainly very passionate about the students doing well and returning to campus. So lots of great opportunities for collaboration there, and really some interesting approaches to be able to think about leveraging that as you move forward.
So we are coming up on the 40-minute mark. So Carlo, Dr. Bonnie, any last thoughts before we get to the Q&A?
So I'll go first. I think I just want I'd like to thank all of our partners and everyone that's participated, whether it's in our podcast or working on a research experiment or simply work with us as partners in student success or graduation outcomes analytics, because we've learned so much. And I feel like we've been able to bridge a lot of knowledge and share it with everybody. And really our goal is to use a very effective data-driven approach to bring that back to you. So, it is our responsibility in this space to work together and really start measuring the impact of how effective we are and sharing it with everybody, so we can build a better workforce of the future. So I hope that everyone found this helpful. I think we're sharing some of the insight that we've learned from everyone, and we're always here if you want to talk to us about learning more about the partnerships of some of the impact, or if you have new ideas that you can bring to the table, we can bring that channel through many different channels. We're going to have you in our data podcast where you can share your ideas, or just any means. We'll be very happy to work with you. Dr. Bonnie?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, one of the things that's been so great about starting DataU and collaborating is the storytelling element. And again, I'll reference a great conversation we had with Dr. Hippolyte from Oklahoma, who talked about the power of storytelling in data. And we know that all of our stakeholders, all of those folks who care a lot about success, want to see the numbers. They want to see employment rates increase. They want to see that in the data, and I think that that's a key component, right? There's a lot of institutions who need additional support there and need to figure out how to either collect that data or leverage that data. But what I absolutely love about DataU is that we've gotten to explore the stories and the cool things that are happening at institutions across the country. I think that's always something I've loved about higher ed, is the sense of camaraderie amongst institutions and entities that are passionate about student success, to share ideas and share thoughts on how to make the world a better place by supporting students. And so I'm very thankful for everyone that's engaged in conversations with us so far. And again, would love to just offer the thoughts. If you're doing something really cool on your campus, we'd love to sit down and learn a little bit more about you so that we can help elevate that voice and really support these student success and graduation success initiatives that are happening all across the country, because there's lots that we can do to work together to make that career development everybody's responsibility and really help support those initiatives.